It's just people will think what they think. And so there's power in trying to understand it, because even you can still reach a point where you don't agree with someone, but just by understanding their perspective, you're like, oh, I get it. I get it. I understand why this exists in the world. I understand what people are trying to accomplish going down this path. And the more you're able to engage with that, the more power you have, because not only can you maintain that groundedness, but you can also stay with something long enough to maybe create a shift. And so maybe it isn't the way you think or someone else thinks. It's maybe a combination of the two that reach to a more evolved place for everyone. Yeah, absolutely. I'm Dominic, and I'm a coach. I focus on consciousness development and relationships. I find the two go very well together, because most of the time when I talk to people about relationships, it's when they've blown up. And so they're having a big challenge in their life, and they're also having a big challenge in consciousness, self-awareness. And so by working with both, I usually find it's a good opportunity for growth, as well as a good opportunity to have better relationships.
So when you say relationships, you mean like intimate relationships or business, professional relationships, or what do you mean?
I hear that in this word, love, unfortunately, like in English, like there's only just one word to say I love. So it's like, I love my dog. I love pizza. I love fresh laundry. But apparently in other languages, they have words to differentiate. So I wish there was a word to talk about relationships that meant like all of them. So like coworker, boss, sibling, parent, intimate partner. Because I would like to tell people when I say I work on relationships, it's all of those. Anytime like you're interacting with someone, that's the relationship. And what I find, it's kind of easy to be calm, centered, peaceful when you're by yourself. But whenever it's you and someone else, like the odds that conflict may arise or friction, it just goes up dramatically. And the potential for that is most dramatic when it's a partner relationship. So I've talked to people a lot about intimate relationships, but I find if I start with them there, then eventually it moves to family relationships and coworkers. And if I start with, at work and coworkers, eventually it moves to intimate relationships. So we wind up doing a lot of cleanup across the board in a person's life.
Okay. This episode is brought to you by Excel Coaching Academy. Hey guys, I'm really excited to let you know that I started a mindset coaching business. So what I want to do with this business is I want to help entrepreneurs, business owners, salespeople, leaders, and fitness enthusiasts or athletes develop the right mindset to increase revenue, improve business or performance, and overcome the challenges needed to become the best version of themselves. You can get more information about this by emailing info@excelcoaching.academy. Yeah, I think, I mean, that's a good point, because the English language has, words that mean the same thing for everything. But, and also too, like a lot of the words are like contextual, like partner. If I hear a person say that to me, that could mean a business partner, or that could mean an intimate relationship. If I hear relationship, that could mean an intimate relationship or a business partner. So it's really interesting what all these words mean. But I think it comes down to context. But I also think that you mentioned the word conscious development, which is unique. I've never heard that before. But I do think that if you're talking about blowing up, if you're talking about people like needing to sort of focus and work on themselves, I think we see that most in intimate relationships for sure. I think in the business relationships is maybe much more underlying, much more passive aggressive. But I think, and I've heard a lot of dating coaches in this space say this, that intimate relationships are like a mirror for yourself.
Yeah. Definitely, it's like a mirror. And I think there's a lot of parallels, say, with like business relationships. I think a lot of times to understand things, what I like to do is contrast things. So we'll take an extreme. So if it's black, we'll look at white. If it's white, we'll look at black. And then with relationships, I do like to compare it to other stuff, because it's not that there's a one-to-one correspondence, but there's a lot to learn. Like, for example, with a work relationship, just think of employer-employee. If you're the employee, there's a role, there's a job, and there's responsibilities. And we talk about those at the beginning. You get interviewed, And if they think you can do it, you get hired.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, you're put on a performance plan, and they check in about every quarter. And so you're constantly getting feedback on that.
Right.
And so you as an employee and they as an employer know if you don't fulfill the responsibilities on an ongoing, regular basis,
Mm-hmm.
well, we can talk about it. We
Yep.
might talk about it a few times, but eventually, if there's no improvement, you're out.
Mm-hmm.
And you both understand that. It's not necessarily the most romantic thing, but like in a relationship, with an intimate partner, it's the same thing in the
Right.
background.
Right.
It's like, like they have expectations of you, you have expectations of them.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, in relationships with a partner, a lot of times those expectations are not voiced.
Mm.
And so they're just kind of like these silent tripwires that you're waiting for someone to trip over and explode. And there's also no regular review. And
Mm.
so people just come in with their expectations. And they're like, yep, well, as long as you meet my expectations, I don't voice and never voice to you. And vice versa, we're good. And then disaster comes soon after.
You're talking about, I think, communication, and I think that's one of the most valuable things in a relationship. I don't know how any relationship, professional or personal, can exist without communication. And I think that sort of transparency about that, like, in the business setting, I guess there's maybe laws that sort of force some sort of transparency or some sort of communication about what the job's going to be before you get there. When you go and apply for these jobs or whatever, what the job is. The money is usually discussed, all those kind of things. So there's that sense of transparency. But it's like when in the relationship space, you mentioned that a lot of these things aren't voiced. And I think that's exactly right. I think that, for some reason, people don't voice their opinions, or not opinions, but their needs in a relationship. And of course, if you don't voice your needs, I doubt that they're ever going to be met, by your partner. Um, so that makes me think, like, what do you think it is? Why do people not? Is it fear of losing the person? Is that why they don't voice what their needs are or boundaries or whatever they expect from the relationship? I mean, or is it just maybe, is it from, do they just assume the other person's going to just know because that's just maybe their needs are common? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we could assume like simple answers, and then we could also assume more complex answers. That's what I mean about the contrast. And so if we just go with what you say, communication, uh, you know, so many things in life are a skill.
Yep.
If you're feeding yourself and you're cooking, that's a skill. Some people cook very well for themselves, some people don't, and same with communication. And so when it comes to communication, like we're going to learn it someplace, and we're either going to do that formally or informally. And so you can major in communications, probably a bit different from relationships, but I think one of the biggest issues about like why this communication isn't happening is because of the lack of skill. When you think about the job, the typical route, if you're going to get a job, um, you're going to go through grade school, high school, undergraduate, maybe get an advanced degree, and then you're going to work for an employer. So you spent all that time, literally over a decade,
Yep.
stacking skills. And then most employers, when they hire you, especially if you're coming out of school, they're like, yeah, we get it. You actually don't know how to do the job. We know you went through all this type stuff. And so we hired you in the school as just kind of as proxy that you're able to pay attention and figure things out, but we're still going to train you.
Yep.
And so that's what's going on the job. And so now if you look over to personal relationship, uh, there's no training for the relationship. There's no training on the communication. And then when you get it, your partner doesn't sit you down and say, hey, I know you're not like going to be my ideal partner. Like I have certain needs and desires. Let me express these to you. And like, I'm going to give you regular feedback over time. It's not to say you're doing it poorly. It's just to help you be like a good partner for me. And so there's a complete absence for that. So let's say one is just complete lack of communication skill. You mentioned another thing like fear. Yeah, that's another thing. because when people communicate, like, needs, desires, I'd like to use this few words, couple words, like boundaries and standards. And so people are communicating their boundaries, their standards. And many people, because of the way they grow up, they just assume whenever they communicate that, they're going to be seen as a bad person. They're going to be seen as mean. Or they're going to be seen as complaining. Or they're going to, they'll fear that the other person will run away. And says, like, I expect you to communicate with me on a daily basis. That's my standard. And so some people don't want to say that because, wow, if I said that, the other person might think I'm needy. Other person might think I'm controlling. Other person might think like I'm weird or odd. And I don't want them to think that. So I'm not going to say it. So I'll just start with those two. Yeah, communication, bad. A lot of fear. Yeah. And so, people have to get better at the communication, and they have to lose the fear to be better in the relationship.
It's crazy, man, because you mentioned like people have their needs, they voice their needs. Potentially the person could see that as needy or controlling. And I think that does two things. I think, first of all, the situations that actually are, I mean, maybe needy's not so bad. Maybe it's annoying, but like actual being needy is not that bad of a thing. But being controlling, people are in those situations and they are bad. But I think if you just slap that label on anything that you don't understand or anything that you feel is outside of what you think it would be if you were in that person's shoes, I think that's dangerous to just slap that, because I think a lot of people do that. I think they just, something doesn't, it's not their ideal way in the relationship and they just slap labels on it. Controlling is one. I talked to somebody a couple days ago. It seems to be that people are using the word narcissist freely. Everybody's, a lot of people's ex is a narcissist, that kind of thing. And so I think we need to be careful with the labels that we put on these things. But I think the reason that people do that is because if they're in that spot, and I'm not talking about the people who are actually being controlled, that's a problem that needs to be addressed. I'm talking about the people who don't understand the person's needs, and this person's addressing those needs to them. It's like you need to really understand where that person is coming from, because they have boundaries, if they have needs, if they have things they're communicating with you, then I feel like if you provide those needs to that person, that is you loving that person. That's you showing that person love, because they're telling you how they need to be loved, essentially. But I think the problem is that, like, a lot of times when we're in those spaces, we don't really understand where that person's coming from, and maybe it seems excessive or obnoxious, or we just whatever, we don't understand it. And so I think I don't know, I think that's where a lot of disconnect maybe happens in those situations, is because one party doesn't understand it and the other party is saying that, hey, this is like, if you literally do this thing for me, it will show me that you love me. If you, like, we talk about love languages, like words of affirmation and that kind of stuff, like those are real things for people. But I don't know, I think if we just maybe put in a little bit more effort to understand why that person is expressing those things to us, I think our relationships might be more fulfilling and last longer.
Yeah, I do agree. I mean, very, very huge emphasis on the understand.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a bit dated, but they still talk about it. And it might be a cultural thing, like in the West, actually. A lot of times people are seeking to respond, like they're
Mm-hmm.
listening and they want to respond. They're not seeking to understand. And so that this old management book, I think they said 7 habits of highly effective people. One of the habits was seek first to understand, then to be understood. And so a lot of times in relationships, the back and forth, instead of like, you need to understand me. And the other person's like, no, you need to understand me, understand where I'm coming from. And if they just reverse it and says, no, I need to understand you. I'm going to be quiet. I'm just going to listen. And then, part of communication skills, I'm going to repeat back what you said and then ask do I understand correctly? And once we've affirmed that I've actually heard you, then I can respond. I think the big problem a lot of times in communication is that people think communication is happening when it's not. It's just like two people like talking at each other.
Right.
And then to, address some of the other things you said in terms of like, love language and understanding what people's needs are. I'm a stickler for language.
Mm.
And it's not saying I'm better at it, but like, words really seem to catch with me or stick with me at some point in time, because I feel maybe they don't have the right energy. And so whenever someone starts talking about, well, I need this, it's kind of like, imagine if you go at your job and you're saying, well, I need this break right now, or I need a break right after lunch. I need a nap or something. I don't think that goes over well. But I think when you express like, so, well, this is my desire, this is my want, this is my preference, and so I understand you may not want, or you may not have the capacity to give this to me, but I'm expressing this, and so it's really a starting point of negotiation.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to put that out for you, and I want to hear what you have to say about that, and so. I think when people say like I need something, I like the concept, because they're informing. Um, I would encourage people to just say, I would like if, or my desire is this, because I think it somehow just passes that threshold with the other person better. Like they're less likely to get riled up, or let's say to get triggered and say, oh, well, like what you need, you mean I'm not fulfilling your needs? You mean I'm not giving you what you need? Or like, oh, you're a demanding person. So that's one thing. And I love the love languages, because I think they're a beautiful framework.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I kind of hate them too, because again, it kind of gets back to the demands. Like, unless you can love me in this specific way, then I can't appreciate your efforts. Like your efforts mean nothing to me. And so I get it, right? Words of affirmation, gift giving, touch. I can understand these are people's preferences. But the other thing is, we also want to meet people like where they're at. And I think that's one of like the tragedies in relationship. We meet someone, we like them, and then we'll say like, I love you, but only if you do these things for me.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't do these things for me, then I don't love you. I have big difficulty with it. And I think my encouragement to people is, recognize what your wants are, your preferences, communicate those, see what the other person has to say about that, and always see them in their highest potential. Like they have the ability to grow, to expand. So maybe they can't meet it today, but maybe they can meet it at some place down the road. And also, as we grow and expand, and sometimes we may even say heal, then maybe some of those things we thought we needed as like a love language, we're not as insistent on. We might say, you know what, that used to be important to me. I'm less desirous of that thing, because I do think the end game in all this, what people are missing, this expectation that someone can actually give us something in sufficient quantity that will be, say, a happier being, I don't think works. And so, and I would say to anyone, if you really want to be happy in a relationship, figure out how to be happy outside of a relationship. Just figure out how to be a happy person. And if you just look at stats between people on different medications and antidepressants and road rage and everything else, it's just like there's a lot of unhappy people out there.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you take an unhappy person, a person who doesn't know how to be happy, and you put that person in a relationship, a person's still going to be unhappy, regardless of what the other person is trying to do.
Yeah, I think the crazy thing about love languages is it has the word language in it. And it's like we use language to communicate. And so I feel like, if just to go back to love languages for a minute, I feel like if we use those love languages to communicate our love to a person, I do think that's what it does. I think that we talk about understanding because I think you're right. If a person says I have this love language and they tell that to their partner, what it sounds like is, your efforts. I don't see your efforts outside of this language, whatever this thing is, words of affirmation or whatever. I don't see that. I don't value that. That's probably the message it sends. But then we talk about understanding, and I think the understanding comes in when your partner, you can hear your partner's love language and you can say, okay, well, just because I do this thing for them, this maybe this outside of this. So just say your thing is touch, their thing is words of affirmation. If you think that you provide physical touch, well, to you that might signal that they're loving you, but to them it might mean something different. So I think that's where the understanding comes in, of like listening to what it is they have to say and say, okay, well, this means this to me. This means the same thing to them. And so I think that's why understanding, actually understanding what your partner needs. I think that's why it's so important.
Yeah. Well, I'll add to that. I think it's a good place to begin, and that's why I say I love him and I hate him at the same time,
Right.
because I don't think it's a complete understanding in the sense that, yeah, if someone wants physical touch instead of words of affirmation, then yes, I do want to provide that to them.
Mhm.
I think the catch though is I've never seen someone be able to satisfy someone else's needs or desires at the level that they want it. So it's kind of like the person saying, like, essentially they say, like, I want to be loved. And so at some point, something's going to happen and they're going to realize, maybe in some big paradigm shift of their existence or just multiple times, well, this person's not able to love me in the way that I want. And it could open up like a big disappointment. So, for example, we'll use a practical example. Let's say like an anniversary or a birthday. Let's say for like a woman that could be like super important. Like, is just like, like our anniversary, like, I so value that you remember that and like you give me a gift. I mean, that's how you communicate to me that you love me and that you care for me and that you want to, give me that understanding. And so let's say, the guy is doing well across like multiple dimensions. Let's say nearly all of them. But for some reason, he just can't get it together on the anniversary. Small thing becomes a big thing. And so he forgets, he doesn't get the gift. And, we've all seen the sitcom or the little comedy thing, and where the woman is like, oh, honey, I'm so excited about tonight. And the guy is like, like, what's tonight? And she said, oh, you didn't. You forgot. How could you? Type thing. And meanwhile, like, he's showing up in all these other different ways, but because of this one dimension that is so extraordinarily important to her, he's like, for whatever reason, we don't know, for a reason, he's not meeting that measure. She could do a throw the baby out with the bathwater type thing, and react to that in such a way where it's just like, I just can't be happy with you because you haven't done this. So, I saw an example of this. I did, as I am wont to do over time, took a self-development course, and it was one of these like large group courses, and met a woman in there, and she was talking about how she was unhappy with her husband, because like he was not speaking her love language, her exact words that she said. And I ran into her, I think, about 6 months, afterwards, and it just came up, and I said, "Oh, how's that going?" And she said, "I let it go." I mean, I recognize that, he was putting in effort, and it still wasn't what I had in mind. But I appreciate that he had put in effort, and I appreciate what he was doing in all these other places in our relationship. That I, I decided not to just frame what love meant to me in such like a tight container as I was. So, yeah, I mean, it's I think love languages are a good starting point. I think there can be a lot more opportunity for growth and expansion there too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And I kind of see your point on that. But I think, like, outside of the love language, I think even the desire to understand your partner, I think, can really go a long way. or to at least try to understand like where they're coming from.
Yes.
So I think you're right. I think because I don't think there's a lot of that, that goes on between intimate partners. Like there's like a, I don't know. It seems like there's a lack of understanding because for some reason there's on both sides of the equation there's this philosophy of, like you said earlier, if you sort of quote unquote give in to these needs, then you're, this person's being needy or they're taking advantage of you or whatever. And I don't know where this thing came along of like this is a weakness to be this person with your part. I don't know where that started, but it's kind of getting old at this point because it's just like everywhere. Like there's so many people that think that, like being a true partner to your partner, for some reason that's wrong or weak or
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know the origin of it myself, on this word needy, or
mm,
any of these words, actually. I, I, I think anytime you label something, again, we get limitation of language. Like there's a positive in the sense that, okay, you create an understanding. So, if my partner calls me needy, then that's some level of communication.
mm-hmm,
But at another level, like it's almost like I've heard nothing, because like we may have two different definitions of needy going on, and it's not really descriptive enough. And so I could kind of push back on my partner. And I said, okay, so I heard you say I'm needy. What does needy mean to you? And it says, oh, well, when you come through the door, you have to tell me about your day. And, I would just like some peace and quiet. And this is so if I just didn't tell you about my day, or I told someone else, or like, let's say I waited an hour, I come home, say hi, I work out. And then, after I shower, I come and like tell you about my day. Would that still be needy for you? Oh no, that's okay. Because then I've had time like to decompress and adjust to your time in the house. I say, oh, okay. So I do love when people are specific there. Um, and I also agree with you. I think anytime people are kind of in this place of needy, of
mm-hmm,
using these terms like back and forth, I would say, well, that's not really helpful. I mean, just describe it like back and forth. And then it's also, um, it can be a time for a person to have some self-reflection. I
mm-hmm,
think on both sides, because if you're calling someone needy, I don't think that's really productive. So what is it within oneself that would use that term? And it's like, am I having a bad day? Am
right,
I feeling frustrated? Am I feeling triggered and challenged in my ability to actually show up in a
mm-hmm,
relationship? And so like I'm kind of fighting back by hammering on this person, telling them that like, no, I'm not the one with the problem. You're the one with the problem. So there's a chance for like self-reflection there. And there's a chance for self-reflection before even saying the word. Like I can say, I feel this person's needy. And then it's like, but how would that help? So instead of saying me telling this person is needy, it's like, why do I feel that they're needy? And then
mm-hmm,
going on that path. And then if I say come to some sort of resolution on that, then the other part is saying, well, what do I still have to communicate that would be helpful and productive? And so, um, because sometimes people in relationships, I mean, I think we're all asking for the same thing. We're asking to be loved.
mm-hmm,
And so if we are asking to be loved, then what am I perceiving that this other person wants, or what am I failing to understand? Or like, um, is it, would, can I negotiate, or can we come up with another solution where I'm not showing up like this because I don't feel like I can, or it makes me really uncomfortable, but it still makes the other person feel loved or feel connected. And I think there's so many things to be said about just the languaging and what you're saying to the person, because I think if we're seeking to understand someone when they're talking to us,
mm-hmm,
then I think if we're speaking, that's actually a very active moment. I mean, we're putting effort to say something. So what we want to do is be understood. We want to be and receive too. And so, if we just say you're needy, then we've diminished our capacity in both of those things. But instead of saying you're needy, is saying, you know, when this happens, I feel this way and I want to share that with you and talk about it. Then you still have that space of expansiveness and openness where both of you can dive deep and come up with options or really try to understand something.
I want to backtrack for just a second. You were talking earlier about, I think you said conscious development.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious about that. Like, what does that mean? Because I don't know. I think one way to develop is like through relationships. And like I said, especially intimate relationships, because I think you learn so much about yourself when you're just interacting with other people in general, but especially like intimate relationships. So when you say conscious development, what do you mean by that?
Mm. Well, I use three terms almost like interchangeably, like so consciousness development, uh, increasing self-awareness,
Mm,
or say becoming more spiritual. Like to me, those are all kind of like the same thing.
okay.
And so like in a nutshell, it's just learning about yourself more and more. That's what I think each of those things are. Um, on the lens of consciousness, what I like about that is that like there's multiple models of consciousness out there,
Hmm.
maps of consciousness. I think Richard Hawkins came up with something actually called the map of consciousness. And you can find that in his book he wrote, Power versus Force. There's another one, I don't know who wrote it, like Spiral Dynamics, talks about, again, different levels of consciousness. But there's multiple ones of these. I mean, you can even say like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's another model of consciousness. Um, but I think at the end of the day, the basic understanding is whatever level of consciousness you're at. So let's use Maslow's, first level, food, clothing, shelter. And so if you're focused on one or more of those things at that level, you're going to have a different perception of reality than say someone who's focused on getting a promotion
Mm,
while they're working at like say Facebook.
hmm.
And so the same thing could happen, meaning like your food could drop on the floor. You're about to eat and the food could drop on the floor. Or let's say you're both at some luncheon for some reason and they tell you, hey, there is a snafu with the caterer, no food.
Mm,
If you're at the food, clothing, shelter level, like you're going to have quite a different experience than say someone who's well employed and just trying to get a different promotion or more pay. And so um, when I relate consciousness development to relationships, it's kind of the same thing. People come into relationships at different levels. And so how do these levels get created? It's largely through childhood. And so, let's say, uh, you know, one person's parents, let's say they're practicing Buddhist for 40 years, and then they have a child, um, and they're teaching this child, all these different spiritual concepts and ways of being and centering themselves and being non-reactive and not having attachment. That person, say by the age of like 20, is going to have a much different level of consciousness than say someone born into a house where, let's say, there was like drug addiction, physical abuse, a parent leaves, um, uh, poor educational opportunity type things. So those two people, same age, they born at the same time, same age, just different levels of consciousness.
mm,
And so when they go into relationship, like wherever you go, you bring your consciousness with you. And so a lot of times, which you'll see the people having the most conflict in relationship, their consciousness isn't at a level yet where they can have harmony and peace in their relationships. And so what does that look like a lot of times? Lack of emotional maturity, lack of emotional intelligence. There's a lot of reactivity. There's a lot of trying to win arguments rather than trying to resolve challenges, resolve conflict. Yeah. So, um, so I think which way you approach it, whether with a model of consciousness, or let's say you don't want to get into all the models, if you just want to increase self-awareness, a lot of just introspection is like, what do I think and why do I think it? I think, everyone should serve in the military. Okay. Well, why do I think that? What's the origin of that belief? When did that begin? Um, why do I think it's wrong not to serve in the military? And then the more you ask yourself questions, the more you get to know more of yourself. Because most people, they lack the self-awareness. And so they just have beliefs and perspectives that they're filled with that they just go forward in their life with. And let's say they go into a relationship and they'll just say, well, women should do all the housework. And so, you come in a relationship with that and you come with a partner, and let's say like she didn't grow up in a household like that at all. And, different level of consciousness, different level of perspectives, different level of like awareness. And so, if that person tried to become more self-aware, he says, well, why do I believe that? Like here I'm with my partner and she doesn't believe that. And so it's like, why does she believe what she believes? Why do I believe what I believe? And it's like, is what I believe effective? Is it efficient? Does it create disharmony or does it create more harmony? And so that's just, a way of, I think, going through the self-awareness channel through a lot of introspection, asking questions. And then like the last one, the spirituality, it's although similar to the other ones. I think when it comes to spirituality, I would just call it a lot of what I call mind science, in the sense that so many things were figured out like literally like thousands of years ago. And if we just learn these things, then we're good. Like centuries ago, like the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. I mean, that tells you in many different ways, how to have like a harmonious life. And if you just follow these tenets, you're good. And so that can be very effective if someone goes that route. Um, and the other thing is, and you mentioned already, is just get out there and do stuff. Bump around, get in a relationship. Like if you don't know how to be in a relationship, get into a relationship. You'll learn a few things. You may not learn how to have the best relationship, but you'll definitely learn what doesn't work,
Yeah.
what's not effective. Yeah, for sure.
Well, so you mentioned self-awareness at the beginning of that, and I think that's like really, really important. And I feel like it's something it's not talked about enough, because I honestly think that self-awareness can, I don't know about eliminate, but at the very least alleviate a lot of problems that we have. Because I don't think a lot of people, are understand, like they don't understand how their actions come across to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you might you might think that you're sending a message, but the other person, what it is that we're receiving is something completely different from that message because of how you're coming across to the person. And there's these personality assessments like DISC personality and those kind of things that will teach you a lot about yourself. And there's like different personality types and styles and stuff like that. And I don't know. I think especially like intimate relationships, but for sure in the business space, like you can tell a lot. Like when you know a lot about yourself, you know how you're going to interact with other people and how these people are going to perceive you, and that's just extremely important, because you can craft your message all day long and you can work on what you're going to say and how you're going to present yourself, but it's like it's going to be bottlenecked by how that person takes that message in, and so you
Yeah.
have to know how you're coming across to people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you bring up these personality assessments. I mean, I love these
Hmm.
because personality assessments, they too are like mirrors. And so there's this one book I love. I think this is probably the wrong title, but like 99 Ways of Seeing You.
Hmm.
And so it literally has like 99 different type of personality assessments or frameworks or just ways of seeing yourself. And so it even includes things like, astrology is one way. Enneagram is another. It goes through Ayurveda and like the doshas. And but there's 99 of these. And If you go to the very end of the book, I think in the conclusion it says, so after all these frameworks, what have you learned? That there's many different ways that you can show up, and there's many different representations of you. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not that any one of these are true, but the more reflections that you see of yourself, the more you're actually able to know yourself.
Mm.
And I think when it comes to like the work world, I mean, companies pay for these assessments. I mean, they hire the companies, they want their employees to take them, and they want their employees to share them. And, so I think sometimes it's a color assessment. I'm an orange.
Yep.
And so everyone knows what an orange is. And other people, I'm a red. And so everyone knows what a red is. And so, when a red is talking,
Mm-hmm.
what's important to them, how they'll communicate their style. And when you speak to a red, you know what they value hearing and what they're listening for, and what you should say and what you shouldn't say, and how you should say it to them. Um, so, I mean, if that's good in the business world, I mean, of course, that would be good with like your partner and your relationship. I mean, you should know if your partner's in orange or green or purple, and like vice versa. Or, if they're like a 9 or a 1 or 4 on
Mm-hmm.
the Enneagram, or, what their disc is as well. Because it's, I think a lot of times people listen to figure out if they're right or if the other person's wrong,
Yep.
but they're not focused on just, well, who's in front of me right now?
Mm-hmm.
Who's in front of me? What's important to them? And how can, I think this is a very good way of thinking about relationships. How can I show up best to be in service to this person in this moment? And
Yep.
that's why I think the self-awareness is so good, because the more self-awareness you get, it's like you become more resilient. It's like you're gaining superpowers. You're gaining methods of remaining grounded and centered no matter what's happening. And so you get to a certain level, like even if your partner is, say, kind of freaking out or triggered, you can remain in that grounded state, and you can actually be of service to them by like keeping a regulated nervous system and interacting with them in that moment where they can calm down, or they can find their center again. A lot of times you see this, the videos they post everywhere of interactions with people and like cops. And so a lot of times things will blow up, because that gets attention. But if you look in the comments, a lot of times you'll see comments are like, well, why didn't he de-escalate? Or why didn't she de-escalate? And I think that's what you want to do in relationships. I mean, it never helps in an intimate relationship to escalate things. And so if you have great self-awareness, you can be in that place where you still have enough presence to say, things are getting more tense here. What can I do to bring it down, bring it back to a place where we're still connecting with each other?
Yeah. Yeah. And something too, like we think about intimate relationships, we think about professional relationships, and we think about like the other person, but I don't think a lot of us think enough about the relationship we have with ourselves. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's a very, I mean, that is probably the most important relationship that we have, because you have to know how, like, who you are and how you respond to these things and why you respond. Like I tell people a lot that knowing, I hate using this word, but like knowing what your triggers are and what bothers you and why these things bother you, like just exploring yourself in that way to find out kind of, what it is that really motivates or bothers or inspires you. It doesn't have to necessarily be a negative thing, but just knowing these aspects about yourself, like I think this is very important. And I think knowing these things, it helps us show up in certain ways in the intimate relationships and in the professional setting. And also too, just like, especially in the business world, like, man, there's things that, and I guess the intimate space too, but there's things that really test you, like, challenges you got to overcome to build a business or pursue a career or whatever. And if you don't really know who you are and who you are and how you should respond in these situations, then it's very possible the situation can tell you how you should respond, which of course is not going to do anything for your self development. So I think it's just important to really know who you are and like have that relationship with yourself and say that like this is this is who I am. And
Yeah.
of course, that leads into the conversation of, well, how does a person do that? And I think you mentioned earlier, just go out and do things. Try to test yourself. Try to pursue a career that maybe you feel like you're not qualified in. Try to get outside of your comfort zone. Try to build a business or whatever it is. Because I think overcoming those things is one of the ways that we do build ourselves and build that strengthen that relationship with ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I, I'd like to share that I don't think people ever really truly know themselves.
Hmm.
I mean, even if they're making really good attempts to do so, I mean, I think at best, you might know 50 or 60% of like who you are and what you're capable of.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's okay. I mean, much better than knowing like say 5 or 10%.
Yeah.
And I think yes, one of the best ways to figure out who you are is to do things, and particularly to do hard things,
Hmm.
to do things that you don't have any knowledge with. So in many ways, like getting that job that you have a lot of uncertainty or fear in is great, because that's going
Mm-hmm.
to be the greatest like teaching tool. Um, Same with uh, relationship. If you have some uncertainty about it, or you feel that quote unquote this person is out of your league for a variety of reasons, then that's going to be a great opportunity to learn. And I think what we get caught up in is like we don't want to feel pain, we don't want to feel hurt. The thing is, like, no matter what we do, that's going to happen anyway. And so part of it is just accepting that. There's this phrase of like feel the fear and do it anyway.
Right.
There's also this thing you hear about saying, get out of your comfort zone, which I think again, language, it's poorly named. That the comfort zone is actually, it's a place of extreme discomfort, because no one actually wants to be in the comfort zone. Everyone's trying to get out of that, but they're saying, well, if I get out of here, then I'm going to feel this pain I don't want to. And so you want to like be on the edge. And so you want to be able to push a certain amount that you can withstand it. It's kind of like going to the gym. You're going to work out. You're going to tear down the muscle. There will be some pain. You'll go to failure, exhaustion, and you keep doing it over time, and like your capacity grows. So yeah, I mean, you have to go out there and try these different things. And I think particularly in that space of relationships, it's like, say, yeah, you're going to be hurt. you're,
Yeah.
you're, you're going to be in tears sometimes. Are you really going to see aspects of yourself that like you'll feel tremendous shame or guilt about? And, and also say, but that's also where I get to find myself. That's also where I get to grow, because many of the things that trigger us, it's because of things that we're carrying around that we don't have to. And whether we're in a relationship or not, we're still carrying those things around. But the beauty of relationships is that it can help us surface those things and we can see it. And once we see it, we have that awareness, we can actually say, well, can I let this go? Can I shift? Can I change? Do I have to carry this around? And I think that's the real beauty of relationships. And I'd say from a certain, existential viewpoint, that's the whole point of relationships. It's to help you know yourself better.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard that before, that relationships are there to help us grow, you know. So going all the way back, before we close out, going all the way back to the beginning of this conversation, there was something you said, and I forgot what it was. We were talking about relationships. You mentioned consciousness development, and there was one other thing you said you sort of focus on. I think there was another area, or was that?
I think, let's see, conscious development and relationships.
Or that maybe that was it. I'm not sure. I feel like there was a
Yeah.
third one there.
Yeah. Well, when I talked about, say, maybe three dimensions of that, like, so, there's conscious development, there's definitely increasing self-awareness. And then I believe the other one I said was like, expanding or growing in your own spirituality.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I must. Yeah, maybe I was. I just wanted to make sure we covered all three of those sort of areas. Uh, yeah, I don't know. Just the relationships. because we were talking earlier about the professional relationships and sort of making a link between the two. But I think one thing that's like clearly missing, like one thing that makes the two professional relationships and then personal relationships vastly different is the emotions that we feel in the intimate relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one thing that really makes it hard for a lot of people to be in these relationships and maybe grow through that if it's not a good relationship for them, because emotions get involved, you get attached to the person, sometimes it's hard to leave the person, sometimes you end things on bad terms, whatever it is, and there's just like all these different things, but you don't really, at least not to that extent, you probably don't have that in the professional space. um I mean, I would be comfortable saying that I think most people do not feel that emotional attachment to their workplace. Maybe they do. Maybe they really love their job and they just But I think the emotions really make it a different thing. Uh, and I think like handling our emotions, listening to our emotions, processing our emotions is a whole nother rabbit hole that a lot of us were not really taught maybe how to do.
Yeah, no, we're not. And a lot of what I work with my clients, I just say, wow, if if we were just taught this stuff when we were children.
Yeah.
Like, if honestly, if what I taught was taught when people were children, like I'd have to find new work because people
Yeah.
would already have these skills. But yeah, if you think about like emotions as another dimension that you get to explore, with
Mhm.
yourself and like with other people. I mean, let's say like you're born and like you're paralyzed, and so you have awareness, you have consciousness, but you also have a limitation in like mobility. So you're not going to say be able to explore that dimension of moving around in the world physically.
Mhm.
And so everything that we have just adds to it. So, the ability to move our fingers and our arms, our limbs, turn our head, the five senses, the touch, the smell, the taste, the sound, the sight, that just brings in more and enriches our experience. And it helps inform us. And I also add in emotions. And so I think sometimes people make the mistake where they'll numb themselves out. And sometimes you see that with a lot of substance use, alcohol, like drugs and stuff, because the emotions can be too intense. And sometimes we numb ourselves out unknowingly. But I think that's just as vital as, say, the five senses, being able to feel that full range of emotions. And in fact, they've came up with something called like the emotion wheel, and it's just a list of different emotions going around, and it's to help people know what they're feeling. Because a lot of people, they're like, I feel angry, I feel sad, I feel happy. And so, but there's a lot more other emotions. I feel diminished, I feel fatigued, I feel enthused, I feel slighted. And so the more you're able to feel those emotions and the more you're able to describe those, even if it's not with language, just like internal nuance, knowing what those are, you're just having a much richer experience of the world than, say, someone else. And so the thing about emotions, very, very, very rich data information source, very useful. And I feel you want to feel the emotions, you want to experience them, but you don't want to drown in them. And that's the thing, I think, where some people feel like emotions are too much and they stay away from it. Are they feel all the emotions like all the time, rather than understanding that and saying, okay, it's important to feel, but it's also important to go back to action,
Mhm.
to go back to doing things and picking up more information as well. So it's like you feel it, you experience it, you sit with it, you process it. Sometimes you can do that all in one sitting, and some you can't. And then, if you can't do it all in one sitting, you just come back to it, and you go back to the action. So I like your point about the emotions, because yeah, we're not taught how to deal with them, but they're kind of like, I feel like the ultimate spice and seasoning of
Yep.
life, to have those
Yeah.
emotions. And you even hear it in poetry, better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all. And so it's wrapped up in there. It's just like, well, in the end there was pain, but yeah, there was pain, but along the way there's also love,
Yeah.
which we want to experience all of that. You hear a lot of the spiritual people say, Well, you can't experience light without the dark. And so
Yeah.
a lot of times we know things by contrast. We know what a beautiful day is because we know what an awful day is. And so with the emotions, yeah, we all want to experience the joy, elation, happiness, of course. And we also want to experience the others. It's like we want to have a rich variety in the emotions.
Mm. You mentioned about, yeah, I guess maybe we learned this as children on what to do or what not to do with emotions. And what's crazy is the way you either learned or were taught how to process your emotions as a child can really like transition into your adult life in the form of attachment styles, like the anxious attachment, the avoidant attachment. And you hear or you learned or whatever it was instilled in you, whatever it was, that you process your emotions in a certain way, and then you grow up and you have a partner, boyfriend or girlfriend, and then you use that same philosophy that you learned as a child on how to process your emotions. So like the anxious people, I think the thing there is that they sort of learned to get validation from their caregiver to ensure that they would not be left or abandoned or whatever. And I know there's probably some other things that contributed to that. But like the avoidant, they probably learned that their emotions were disregarded or insignificant or didn't really matter or whatever it was. And so then they take that into their adult life. And so it's crazy that like how we learn to process emotions at such a young age or what these emotions even mean or whatever. It's just crazy that a lot of us, we take that into our adult lives. And,
Yeah.
again, going back to learning so much in intimate relationships, we learn maybe hopefully how to correct that, through that process.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely not one style of being. I mean,
Mm,
I definitely believe we all have our own uniqueness to us. But, uh, as we said before, like so many things are learned skills in life.
mm,
And so, cooking, keeping a tidy home, earning money, jujitsu. And so, um, people have different capabilities in all those things, even if they learn it. But you want to get to a certain base level
mm,
in all those things. And so when it comes to emotions, I mean, ultimately, sure, we may have a bunch of different expressions, but we all want to train ourselves, build our skills to where we have a very good base level of like emotional regulation. And so we want to be able to have things spike up. We want to be able to feel anger. We want to be able to feel sadness and loss. And like, really, I would say enjoy the richness of that. And then we also want to have the ability to bring ourselves back. And
yeah.
so bring ourselves back from just deep, deep sadness and grief or from, anger or fear, and bring ourselves back to a place where, okay, even if I can still feel signatures of that, I'm able to move forward and take action and function. And a lot of times you gain that capability by feeling the difficult emotion
Mm,
and still working through it. And so
yeah.
imagine like a meeting, like you want to blow up in a meeting and you say, I'm fully in touch with my anger. Like I'm enraged. And you say, you know what? Let me focus on the matter at hand, the resolution here. And just the motion of doing that and participating in that, taking action, you build that relationship and you build that ability to create emotional regulation for yourself and strengthen it. And then like say another time that happens, it takes half the amount of time. And then another time, a quarter amount of time. And eventually same action happens and you can actually see it out of the corner of your eye yet. That this is where I fly into a rage
Mm,
and I don't need to. And you're just like, we're just moving forward. And I think that's when life, starts to become really enjoyable because instead of you just being caught in the storm of your emotions, you're enjoying your emotions and you're seeing where the triggers are and where you might still some growth, but you're still able to navigate and take action with efficiency.
mm. Yeah, I think you're right. I think learning to listen to those emotions, I think that's an invaluable skill, you know. So do you have a social media or website or anything?
Yeah.
That,
Yeah, I could probably be more active, talk about building skills. So on
Okay.
Instagram, my handle is Inner Peace Advisor. So you can find me there, and people can send me a direct message. They want to get in touch. And then if they want to take down an email, it's just my first name, Dominic, Dominic, at innerpeaceadvisor.com. Send me
Okay.
an email. I'll get it. I'll respond. Yeah.
Okay. So, one thing that I ask everybody before we close, and this can be from your personal life if you're comfortable sharing it, or your career. What do you think is one of the most valuable lessons you've ever learned?
Uh, the most valuable lesson I've learned is that I don't know anything.
Hmm.
And it was a wonderful lesson to me because I grew up thinking I was a guy that knew a lot, did well in school, went to Stanford undergrad, got my MBA at Wharton. And so like I know things. And so I was even, doing management consulting. So I'm a guy who knows things, who helps other people know things.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just set in with me one day. I said, wait a second, I kind of get the feeling that there's a lot like I don't know. And I spent time with that. And it probably took a few days to just kind of move through my system. But my conclusion was, I said, of everything I could know, like I don't know anything.
Mm.
And I found tremendous freedom in that because I no longer had to hold on to this like image or this identity of like being the smart guy, being the guy who knows things. I just said, well, if I know I don't know anything, then I can just shut up and listen.
Yeah.
And that's where that, focus of really trying to understand people comes in. I said, well, if I shut up and listen, then I might have an opportunity to know something a little bit better because this person is telling me something that like I probably don't know. So let me try to understand that. Let me try to understand that perspective. So I yeah, definitely one of the most powerful shifts I had, and it really took the edge off my personality too. I became a lot more relaxed, and I could hear anything. I could hear criticism. I could
Mm.
hear so many different things about myself because I'm like, okay, maybe you're right.
Yeah. Well, I think the first step to learning anything is accepting that you don't know the thing. And so I think that's, I don't think you can advance or learn or progress without first having that humility. And I don't even know if I would call it humility. I think it's just awareness of, I think you're right. Like we don't know, like we know whatever we know, but compared to what we don't know, we basically don't know anything, you know?
Yeah,
So, because there's so much, like there's so much to know or, to learn or whatever. And that's like the practical stuff. That's like from other people. That's like different. I don't know how many people there are on the planet, 8 billion plus probably. So there's like 8 billion plus different stories that you would hear from a person if you ask them, what is life? What does life mean? And it shows. So if you magnify it that way, there's just basically endless possibilities that you could learn, or or things that you don't know. So yeah, that's a really important lesson. I feel like.
yeah. And I think if anything, the social media and the internet, it's definitely shown to me none of us agree on anything.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's true.
Yeah.
Um, but something about that though, I think that so it would be easy to be around people that agree with us, have the same thought process and all that kind of stuff. But if if we're around those people and we sort of agree with them and we get along with them, that's sort of one thing. But I think it means much more if we are around people who we don't necessarily agree with, but we still get along with them, we still live with them, we still are productive in society with them, because I think that matters a lot more. I guess the point is like it's easy to be around like-minded people, but the people who see things differently from you, and you still choose to be around them and grow with them either personally or professionally. I think that means a lot more.
Yeah. I mean, it does from the aspect of growth for
Mm,
sure.
yeah.
And again, I mean, it's a certain framing. Maybe not everyone has it, but I think a lot of people do. It's like, I'm here to learn. I'm
Mm,
here to expand. And so from that perspective, yes, it's much more valuable to be around people who do disagree with you, or challenge your thinking, or think completely the opposite to you, because you're gonna learn a lot more about yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and you're gonna learn a lot more just about people in general. Um, and I think it's another form of meditation. And I can do like an active meditation where you can actually keep hearing things from other people that you disagree with, but you're really just seeking to understand,
Mm.
not to agree with a person. You're just trying to understand, like, where is this coming from? Why do they have this perspective? It's particularly useful when you travel or when you encounter people from like different cultures,
Mm-hmm.
because you kind of fall into that more naturally. You know, like, well, we don't think the same thing, but you give it a bit more grace because you're like, oh well, yeah, they were raised in China and I wasn't, so it's not a
Right.
surprise that we think differently. But I think we can kind of use that framing just with anyone we meet. You know, we might think we're on the same page maybe for like months, and then we come across one thing and it's like, oh wow, I thought you were, I thought you were a good person because you thought like and I can't believe you think this other way. And says, well, no, it's not about the good or bad. It's just people will think what they think. And so there's power in trying to understand it, because even you can still reach a point where you don't agree with someone, but just by understanding their perspective, you're like, oh, I get it. I get it. I understand why this exists in the world. I understand what people are trying to accomplish going down this path. And the more you're able to engage with that, the more power you have, because not only can you maintain that groundedness, but you can also stay with something in long enough to maybe create a shift. And so maybe it isn't the way you think or someone else thinks. It's maybe a combination of the two that reach to a more evolved place for everyone.
Mm. Yeah, that's a really good way to put that. Yeah.
Mm.
Um, well, listen, man, I'm gonna let you out of here. I appreciate it. Appreciate the insight.
Yeah.
If you can hang out for just a minute or so, I'll explain to you how I upload this thing. But yeah, definitely appreciate the wisdom on the. I think really I like the self awareness aspect of it. I think that's because I think that's really important. I think that's really where a lot of this stuff starts. You know, it
Mm-hmm.
starts with the self awareness. So I definitely appreciate that. But yeah, I do appreciate it. If you can hang out for just a little bit, I'll talk to you about this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey guys, I appreciate you tuning in today. If you enjoyed this episode, you can find more content at Pure Wisdom Podcast. This is on Facebook, Instagram, Rumble, TikTok, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Music, and Apple and Google Podcasts. There you can like, share, subscribe, and we will see you next time.